The sound of my daughter's designer heels clicking against the marble floor echoed through the house as I carried the final dish, my famous honey-glazed prime rib, into her pristine dining room. 20 dishes. I had spent 4 days preparing. 20 elaborate dishes for her husband's promotion celebration, my 67-year-old hands aching from the endless chopping, stirring, and plating. But as I stood there, watching 30 guests in expensive suits and cocktail dresses chatting around the beautifully set table, I realized there wasn't a single place setting for me. Instead, my daughter Victoria pointed toward the kitchen with, "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." A dismissive wave. "Mom, you can eat in there when you're done serving. The caterer's table is set up by the sink." What she didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret about this magnificent house for 15 years. A secret that would change everything when I finally decided to reveal who really owned her dream home. The story opens in the affluent Rosewood Hills neighborhood of suburban Chicago, inside what appears to be Victoria Sterling's stunning 6,000-square-foot Georgian colonial home. The house is a showcase of wealth. Italian marble countertops, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Tonight, it's hosting a celebration for Victoria's husband Marcus, who just made senior partner at his prestigious law firm. I am Eleanor Hartwell, 67 years old, recently widowed after losing my husband Robert 2 years ago. For the past decade and a half, I've been the invisible support system for my daughter's picture-perfect life. While Victoria climbs the social ladder as a real estate executive and Marcus builds his legal career, I've been the one providing free childcare for their twins, Emma and James, now 16, cooking for their dinner parties, and maintaining their household during their frequent business trips. The evening's guest list reads like a who's who of Chicago's legal and business elite: judges, corporate executives, and social influencers who could advance Marcus's career. Even further, Victoria has spared no expense, hiring a florist for elaborate centerpieces and a sommelier to pair wines with each course. But every single dish on that opulent table was prepared by my hands in their gourmet kitchen over the past 4 days. As I survey the dining room, the full scope of my invisibility hits me. The table is set for exactly 30 people. Every guest has been carefully accounted for except me. Crystal glasses gleam at each place setting, fine china bears the family's monogrammed initials, and elegant place cards written in Victoria's perfect calligraphy mark each seat. My name appears nowhere. When I quietly ask Victoria where I should sit, she barely glances up from adjusting a floral arrangement. "Oh, Mom, I didn't think you'd want to sit through all the boring legal talk. Besides, you'll be more comfortable in the kitchen where you can keep an eye on the serving and make sure everything stays warm." She gestures toward the kitchen island where a single folding chair sits next to a paper plate and plastic fork, the kind of setup reserved for hired help. The contrast is staggering. In the dining room, guests are being served my signature dishes, on Wedgwood china while discussing vacation homes in the Hamptons and children's acceptances to Ivy League schools. In the kitchen, I'm expected to eat my own cooking-off disposable dinnerware while listening to their laughter through the swinging doors. What makes this moment even more painful is the realization that this isn't an oversight. It's deliberate. Victoria planned this entire evening knowing exactly where she intended to place me in the hierarchy. I wasn't forgotten. I was purposefully relegated to the margins of my own daughter's life. Standing in that kitchen, holding my paper plate, something fundamental shifts inside me. For years, I've told myself that Victoria's treatment was just oversight, that she was too busy building her career to notice how she was treating me. But tonight's calculated exclusion forces me to confront a truth I've been avoiding. My daughter sees me not as her mother, but as her unpaid domestic staff. I think about my late husband, Robert, a successful architect who left me well provided. More well provided than Victoria or Marcus ever knew. I think about the sacrifices I made during Victoria's childhood, putting my own career as a finance professor on hold to support her father's firm while raising her. I remember the woman I used to be before I allowed myself to become invisible, in my own family. The breaking point isn't dramatic. There's no shouting or confrontation. Instead, it's a quiet, crystalline moment of clarity. I set down the paper plate without taking a single bite, remove my apron, and make a decision that will change everything. Rather than eating in exile, I walk back into the dining room where the guests are praising the incredible meal. Victoria looks surprised to see me emerge from the kitchen empty-handed. "Mom, is everything okay? Did you get something to eat?" "Actually, Victoria," I say, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "I think I'll head home for the evening. Thank you for having me over to cook." The emphasis on cook, rather than celebrate, is intentional, and several guests pause their conversations to listen. Victoria's face flushes slightly. "But Mom, you haven't eaten anything, and we still need—" "I'm sure you'll manage beautifully," I interrupt gently, but firmly. After all the hard work is done. I retrieve my purse from the hallway table, the same table where family photos show our happy memories from years past, memories that now feel like artifacts from a different life. As I walk toward the front door, I hear Victoria making excuses to her guests about my sudden headache and how tired she must be at her age. Even my departure is being reframed to protect Victoria's image. But for the first time in years, I don't care about managing anyone else's comfort or reputation. The cool October air hits my face as I step outside, and despite the hurt, I feel something I haven't experienced in a long time: the possibility of change. What Victoria doesn't know, what no one in that dining room knows, is that the house they're celebrating in, the house that serves as the foundation of Victoria and Marcus's social status, isn't actually theirs. And tomorrow, I'm going to remind my daughter exactly who holds the deed to her dream home. I wasn't always the invisible woman serving dinner in someone else's kitchen. Once upon a time, I was Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, Associate Professor of Finance at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. I had earned my PhD at 32, published research on investment portfolio optimization, and taught graduate courses to future Wall Street executives. My office overlooked Lake Michigan, and my students regularly sought my advice on everything from market analysis to career trajectory. Robert and I met when I was 35, and he was a rising star at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's premier architectural firms. Our courtship was a meeting of minds. He would sketch building designs while I calculated the financial models that made his dreams feasible. We bought our first home together in Lincoln Park, a modest but elegant brownstone that we renovated ourselves during weekend projects that turned into romantic adventures. When Victoria was born 3 years later, I was at the peak of my career. I had just been offered a department chair position and was consulting for several major investment firms. The future looked limitless. Robert's firm was growing rapidly, my research was gaining national attention, and we had this perfect little daughter who seemed destined for greatness. But somewhere in those early years of Victoria's childhood, I made a choice that would reshape my entire identity. Robert's firm landed a massive contract to design a corporate campus in downtown Chicago, the kind of project that could set us up financially for life. The only catch was that it required him to work 18-hour days and travel extensively for client meetings. Someone needed to be home for Victoria, and between his skyrocketing income and my professor's salary, the math seemed obvious. I took a sabbatical that stretched into years. Just until things settled down, Robert and I told each other. Just until Victoria starts school. But Victoria needed me for homework help, then soccer practice, then college applications. Robert's career continued its meteoric rise, and mine became a distant memory filed away in a box of old academic journals. The shift from Dr. Hartwell to Victoria's mom happened so gradually that I barely noticed it at first. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When Victoria was in elementary school, I was still intellectually engaged, helping with math homework, managing household investments, even guest lecturing occasionally when Robert's schedule allowed. I told myself I was choosing family over career, that this was temporary, that I could always return to academia later. Victoria grew up watching her father command rooms full of important clients while her mother organized carpools and bake sales. She absorbed the message that Robert's work was valuable and visible while mine was supportive and invisible. When she brought friends home from school, she would proudly show them her father's architectural drawings spread across his home office, but she never mentioned that her mother had once been quoted in the Wall Street Journal. The pattern intensified when Victoria reached high school. She was brilliant, accepted into Northwestern's early admission program at 17. But she also developed an expectation that her success was the natural result of having the right support systems in place. I coordinated her tutoring, managed her college applications, and celebrated her achievements from the sidelines, while Robert took credit for her academic genetics and work ethic. By the time Victoria graduated college with honors and landed her first job at Pinnacle Real Estate Group, I had become so accustomed to my supporting role that I didn't even notice how completely I had disappeared from my own life. Robert was the architect, Victoria was the rising real estate star, and I was simply Robert's wife, or Victoria's mother, never Eleanor, never the woman with her own accomplishments and dreams. When Victoria married Marcus 5 years into her real estate career, I watched her unconsciously replicate the same dynamic I had created with Robert. Marcus was ambitious, driven, and completely convinced that his legal career should take precedence over everything else. Victoria, despite her own professional success, began deferring to his schedule, his social connections, his vision of their future. Their wedding was a perfect example of how the pattern had evolved. I spent 6 months coordinating vendors, managing logistics, and ensuring every detail met Victoria's exacting standards. Robert wrote the checks and gave a toast about his daughter's beauty and grace. Marcus's family praised his good fortune in finding such an accomplished woman. But when Victoria thanked her parents during the reception, she credited her father's business acumen for teaching her about success and barely mentioned my contributions to her life. I should have been hurt, but instead I felt proud. Victoria was building the life she wanted, and I had helped make it possible. It didn't occur to me until much later that she had learned to value me exactly the way I had taught her to, as someone whose worth was measured entirely by what I could provide to others. When the twins Emma and James were born, my transformation into the family's invisible support system became complete. Victoria and Marcus both worked demanding schedules. She was building her client base in luxury residential sales while he was climbing toward partnership at Sterling Whitmore and Associates. They needed childcare, and who better than Grandma? Eleanor, who had all the time in the world, now that Robert was semi-retired. I moved from Lincoln Park to a smaller condo in Evanston, closer to Victoria's family, but far enough away to maintain the illusion that I had my own independent life. 3 days a week, I would drive to their house in Rosewood Hills to watch the twins. On weekends, I would cook elaborate family dinners. During school breaks, I would coordinate the children's activities while Victoria and Marcus traveled for work or pleasure. The house in Rosewood Hills became the center of our family's universe, the place where we gathered for holidays, celebrated milestones, and created the memories that would define the twins' childhood. Victoria loved that house. With an intensity that bordered on obsession, she would spend hours showing visitors through its rooms, describing the custom millwork and designer fixtures as if they were precious artifacts. What she never mentioned, what she had somehow forgotten or chosen to ignore, was that the down payment for that dream house had come from my inheritance when my parents died. More importantly, what she had never bothered to ask about was whose name was actually on the deed. But as I drove home from tonight's humiliation, I realized that my secret was about to become her reality check. The erosion began innocently enough, the way these things always do. When the twins were toddlers, Victoria called me on a Thursday afternoon with what she described as an emergency. She had double-booked herself. A crucial client meeting overlapped with James's pediatric appointment, and their regular nanny had called in sick. "Mom, could you possibly cover for just this once? It's for the Pemberton account. You know, the family with the $12 million lakefront property. This could make my entire year." Of course I said yes. What grandmother wouldn't want to help with a sick grandchild? But as I sat in Dr. Martinez's waiting room, holding a feverish James while fielding Victoria's urgent texts about which questions to ask the pediatrician, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just helping with an emergency. I had become the backup plan for Victoria's life. That just this once became a pattern. Client emergencies, school events, social obligations. Whenever Victoria's carefully orchestrated schedule hit a snag, I received a call. The requests always came wrapped in urgency and gratitude, making it impossible to refuse without seeming selfish or unreasonable. "Mom, I know this is last minute, but could you possibly—" became the most frequent phrase in our conversations. What made it particularly insidious was how Victoria framed these requests. She never demanded or expected. She always asked politely, expressed genuine appreciation, and acknowledged the inconvenience. This made it impossible for me to feel exploited, even as my own schedule disappeared beneath the weight of her needs. After all, what did I have to do that was more important than helping my daughter succeed? By the time the twins started elementary school, my role had expanded far beyond emergency childcare. I had become the family's logistics coordinator, meal, planner, and household manager. Every Sunday, Victoria would call with the week's schedule, who needed to be where, what meals should be prepared, which household tasks required attention while she and Marcus were at work. The house in Rosewood Hills became my second home, though I was always careful to knock before entering and never presumed to rest in the main living areas. I had learned to time my arrivals precisely, early enough to have breakfast ready when the family woke up, but not so early that I disturbed their morning routines. I knew which bathroom to use, the powder room off the kitchen, where to store my personal items, a small basket in the pantry, and how to make myself invisible when Victoria or Marcus were entertaining colleagues. The twins grew accustomed to having Grandma Eleanor as part of their daily routine. I helped with homework, attended school events when their parents couldn't make it, and provided the emotional support that busy, successful parents often struggled to offer. Emma would confide in me about middle school drama, while James shared his dreams of becoming a marine biologist. I treasured these moments of connection, even as I recognized that I was filling gaps that should have been occupied by their parents. What troubled me most was how normal this arrangement had become to everyone involved. Victoria's friends envied her amazing support system. Marcus appreciated having reliable childcare that didn't require payment or scheduling negotiations, and the twins simply accepted that Grandma was always available. No one questioned whether this was sustainable or fair. It was simply how our family functioned. The pattern extended beyond childcare into every aspect of family life. When Victoria and Marcus hosted dinner parties, I became the invisible caterer, arriving hours early to prepare elaborate meals and disappearing into the kitchen once guests arrived. When they traveled for work or pleasure, I house sat, maintaining their perfect home and ensuring the twins' routines remained undisturbed. Most painfully, I watched myself disappear from family narratives even as my contributions increased. I guess. Marcus's last promotion celebration, Victoria gave a speech thanking everyone who had supported their success. She mentioned Marcus's mentors, her real estate team, their children's teachers, and even their housekeeper by name. But somehow, the woman who had provided thousands of hours of free childcare and domestic support didn't merit acknowledgement. This wasn't malicious. Victoria genuinely didn't seem to see the scope of my contributions. In her mind, I was helping. Because I wanted to. Because I enjoyed spending time with my grandchildren. Because I had nothing better to do with my retirement years. The idea that I might have my own needs, interests, or limitations simply didn't occur to her. The twins, now teenagers, had absorbed this attitude as well. They loved me deeply and appreciated my presence in their lives, but they also took my availability for granted. Emma would call me at 10 p.m., asking me to drive across town to bring her a forgotten assignment. James assumed I would always be free to attend his soccer games, even when I had other commitments. Like their mother, they had learned to see my time as infinitely flexible and my own needs as secondary to theirs. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of my gradual disappearance was how my financial contributions became invisible as well. When Victoria and Marcus were house hunting 8 years ago, they found the perfect property in Rosewood Hills, but were $30,000 short on the down payment. Victoria called me in tears, devastated that their dream home might slip away because of a relatively small amount of money. I didn't hesitate to write the check. After all, I had the inheritance from my parents, plus decades of careful investments and Robert's insurance money after his death. $30,000 was significant, but not devastating to my financial security. More importantly, it would give my daughter and grandchildren the stable, beautiful home they deserved. But somehow, in the years that followed, that contribution faded from family memory. Victoria and Marcus spoke of their house, their investment, their equity, as if they had achieved this success entirely through their own efforts. When neighbors complimented the property, Victoria would beam with pride about what we've built together, conveniently forgetting the foundation that made it all possible. The same pattern applied to countless smaller contributions, the private school tuition supplements when Marcus's bonus was delayed, the emergency car repairs when Victoria's commission checks were tied up in escrow, the family vacation deposits that I covered to secure better rates. Each contribution was gratefully received and quickly forgotten, absorbed into the family's narrative of self-made success. What stung most was realizing that Victoria had learned to expect these financial interventions without acknowledging them. When she faced a budget shortfall, her first instinct was to call me, not to adjust her spending or seek alternative solutions. I had become her invisible safety net, reliable and silent, essential but unacknowledged. Standing in my kitchen after tonight's humiliation, I finally understood the full scope of what I had allowed to happen. I hadn't just lost my identity, I had financed my own erasure. 3 weeks before the dinner party, Victoria called me with barely contained excitement. Marcus had finally made senior partner at Sterling Whitmore and Associates, the culmination of 8 years of grinding ambition and political maneuvering. This wasn't just a promotion. It was elevation into Chicago's legal elite, complete with a corner office overlooking Grant Park and a salary increase that would push them into the top 1% of earners. "Mom, this is it," Victoria breathed into the phone. "This is everything we've worked for." Marcus will be the youngest senior partner in the firm's history, and the networking opportunities are incredible. Judge Harrison is a close friend of the managing partner, and Senator Coleman's wife sits on the same charity board as Mrs. Sterling. This could open doors we've only dreamed about. But with opportunity came obligation. Marcus needed to host a celebration that would cement his position among his new peers. Something elegant enough to impress the managing partner's wives, sophisticated enough to attract federal judges, and memorable enough to establish him as someone worth cultivating relationships with. The guest list read like a directory of Chicago's power structure: senior partners and their spouses, prominent judges, influential clients, and a carefully selected group of politicians and business leaders who could advance Marcus's career even further. "We're thinking about hiring Belmont Catering," Victoria continued, "but their quote is absolutely astronomical: $28,000 for 30 people. Even with Marcus's new salary, that's a quarter of his signing bonus. And honestly, Mom, nobody cooks like you do. Remember Judge Morrison's retirement party last year? People still talk about your beef Wellington. I felt the familiar tug of pride mixed with resignation. Of course, Victoria would turn to me. I had been solving her logistical problems for so long that it had become our default dynamic. But something about this request felt different, more calculating. This wasn't an emergency or a favor. This was a strategic decision to use my skills to advance their social ambitions while saving money for other investments. When Victoria sent me the proposed menu 2 days later, I stared at my phone in disbelief. 20 dishes. Not 20 servings. 20 distinct courses and accompaniments that would showcase Marcus's sophisticated palate and Victoria's entertaining prowess. The list included items that required days of preparation, a traditional French cassoulet that needed to cure for 48 hours, hand-rolled pasta with truffle oil, duck confit with cherry reduction, and 3 different desserts including my signature chocolate soufflé. The logistics were staggering. My own kitchen was too small to handle this volume, which meant I would need to work in Victoria's kitchen for 4 straight days. The grocery costs alone would exceed $2,000, money that Victoria mentioned, "We'll settle up later," without specifying when or how. Most challenging of all, several dishes required precise timing that would keep me actively cooking and plating throughout the entire party. When I called Victoria to discuss the practical challenges, she had an answer for everything. "Oh, Mom, you'll basically be living here those 4 days anyway. It'll be like a fun cooking retreat. And don't worry about the groceries, just keep track of everything and we'll reimburse you from Marcus's bonus check. The timing will work out perfectly because you're so organized. And honestly, you know these recipes better than any professional chef." What struck me most was her complete confidence that I would say yes. There was no acknowledgement of the physical demand she was placing on a 67-year-old woman, no recognition of the financial burden, and no consideration of what I might want to do with my own time. Victoria had simply assumed that my schedule was entirely flexible and my resources were available for her use. 2 days before the party, while I was already deep into food preparation, Victoria casually mentioned the seating arrangements. "I've been working with a party planner to make sure the table dynamics are perfect," she said, not looking up from her laptop where she was reviewing place cards. "Judge Morrison and his wife are sitting next to the Sterlings. Marcus is positioned between Senator Coleman and the managing partner's wife, and I'm placed strategically near Mrs. Harrison and the federal prosecutor's husband." I waited for her to mention where I would be sitting, but she continued discussing the political implications of various pairings without including me in the calculus. Finally, I asked directly. "Oh," Victoria said, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "I actually wasn't planning for you to sit with the guests. I mean, you'll be so busy making sure everything runs smoothly, and honestly, the conversation will be pretty technical. Lots of legal shop talk and political gossip. I thought you'd be more comfortable having your dinner in the kitchen where you can monitor the food and step away if you need a break." The casualness of her dismissal took my breath away. After 4 days of intensive cooking, after financing the groceries, after providing free labor that saved them nearly $30,000, I was being relegated to eating alone in the kitchen like hired help. But what truly stunned me was Victoria's obvious belief that this arrangement was not only reasonable, but considerate. As if she were doing me a favor by sparing me from boring conversations about subjects I supposedly couldn't understand. That moment, I realized that Victoria didn't see me as her mother who deserved respect and inclusion. She saw me as a resource, convenient, reliable, and infinitely expendable. Walking back to my car after leaving Victoria's dinner party, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the sharp clarity that comes when illusions finally shatter. The cool October air bit at my cheeks, but for the first time in years, I felt truly awake. As I sat in my Honda Civic in the circular driveway of the house I had helped purchase, I forced myself to confront the truth I had been avoiding for far too long. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app, something I hadn't done since my finance professor days. 4 days of cooking, 12 hours each day, 48 hours of labor. At the consulting rate I used to charge for financial planning, that was worth $7,200. The groceries I had purchased with my own credit card totaled $2,347. The wine pairings I had researched and procured added another $800. The decorative flowers I had arranged throughout the house, another $300. But those were just the immediate costs. When I expanded my calculation to include the years of free childcare, emergency babysitting, household management, and financial bailouts, the number became staggering. Conservative estimates put my unpaid contributions to Victoria's family at over $200,000 across the past decade. I had funded their lifestyle while subsidizing my own invisibility. More than the money was the realization of what I had surrendered. Tonight, while I ate leftovers alone in the kitchen, 30 of Chicago's most influential people were praising my cooking without knowing my name. They were networking in the house that my inheritance had helped secure, discussing investment strategies while I, a former finance professor, was deemed too irrelevant to participate in the conversation. The worst part was acknowledging how deliberately I had been excluded. This wasn't oversight or poor planning. Victoria had specifically chosen to position me as the help rather than as family. When Judge Morrison had asked earlier who had prepared the incredible cassoulet, Victoria had smiled and said, "Oh, we have access to an amazing chef who specializes in traditional French cooking." Not my mother, not Eleanor, but an amazing chef. As if I were a professional service they had hired rather than a family member who had sacrificed days of her life for their success. I thought about all the times I had justified Victoria's treatment by telling myself she was simply busy, stressed, or focused on building her career. But tonight's calculated exclusion revealed something much more troubling. Victoria had learned to see me exactly as I had taught her to see me, as someone whose value was entirely transactional, whose worth was measured only by what I could provide. The pattern extended beyond tonight's humiliation. Every family gathering for the past 5 years had followed the same script. I provided the labor while Victoria took the credit. I financed the experiences while she basked in the social benefits. I solved the problems while she enjoyed the solutions. And when the celebration was over, I disappeared back to my small condo in Evanston, while she and Marcus entertained compliments about their perfect life. Sitting in that driveway, I reached for my purse and pulled out the manila folder I always kept in my car, my financial documents, insurance papers, and most importantly, the deed to the house at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, Rosewood Hills. The deed that bore my name, not Victoria's. The deed that represented the one card I had never played in this family dynamic. 15 years ago, when Victoria and Marcus were struggling to qualify for their mortgage, I had made what seemed like a simple decision. Rather than just contributing to their down payment, I had purchased the house outright and allowed them to live in it while making payments to me instead of a bank. It had been a financial arrangement that benefited everyone. They got their dream home without the stress of traditional lending requirements, and I secured a steady income stream while helping my daughter build equity. But somewhere along the way, everyone had forgotten the legal reality. Victoria and Marcus spoke of their house, made renovations without consulting me, and treated the property as if they held clear title. Even I had begun thinking of myself as merely a helpful parent, rather than the actual owner of a $1.2 million piece of real estate. Now, holding that deed in my hands, I realized I wasn't as powerless as I had believed. Victoria had built her entire social identity around this house. The elegant entertaining spaces, the prestigious address, the symbol of success that impressed her colleagues and clients. Her real estate career depended on projecting an image of prosperity and stability, and this house was the foundation of that image. The sound of laughter drifted from the house as guests moved to the living room for after-dinner drinks. Through the large windows, I could see Victoria gesturing animatedly as she told some story, probably about her latest real estate triumph or Marcus's meteoric rise at the firm. She looked radiant, confident, completely in her element as the hostess of Chicago's legal elite. But for the first time, I saw her performance clearly. Victoria wasn't just entertaining guests. She was performing a version of success that depended entirely on resources she didn't actually control. The house that impressed her colleagues belonged to me. The lifestyle that projected prosperity was subsidized by my unpaid labor. The social confidence that allowed her to network with judges and senators was built on a foundation of financial security that I had provided. I started the car and began driving home, but instead of feeling defeated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: agency. For too long, I had accepted the role of invisible support system, believing that my value lay entirely in what I could give to others. But tonight had shown me the cost of that bargain, not just to my own dignity, but to the authentic relationship I could have had with my daughter if she had ever been forced to see me as a person rather than a resource. The time had come to remind Victoria exactly who held the power in our family dynamic. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my place at the table, but my very identity. And the deed in my purse would be the key to that transformation. I drove home through the quiet streets of Evanston in a strange state of hyper-awareness. Every streetlight seemed brighter, every turn more deliberate than usual. For the first time in years, I felt completely present in my own life, rather than existing as an extension of someone else's needs. The radio played softly, something classical that I actually listened to instead of having as background noise while mentally planning Victoria's next meal or scheduling crisis. My condo felt different when I walked through the door. Smaller, yes, but also entirely mine. No one here expected me to cook elaborate meals or manage complex logistics. No one dismissed my presence or relegated me to eating in the kitchen. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I made myself a cup of tea, something I rarely had time for at Victoria's house, and sat in my favorite chair overlooking the small garden I had been neglecting for months. The deed lay on my coffee table where I had placed it, and I found myself staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. Eleanor Catherine Hartwell, sole owner of 847 Maple Ridge Drive. Not Victoria Sterling, not Marcus Sterling, not even Eleanor Hartwell as a co-owner or beneficiary. Just me, a fact that had somehow become invisible to everyone, including myself. I thought about Robert, my late husband, and wondered what he would think of what I had become. He had loved my strength, my intelligence, my ability to command a classroom full of MBA students. The woman he had married would never have accepted. Being treated as hired help at her own daughter's dinner party. Somewhere along the way, I had betrayed not just myself, but his memory of who I was. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since my teaching days. Instead of immediately checking my phone for messages from Victoria about cleanup duties or thank you note coordination, I made myself a proper breakfast and sat down with my laptop to research something I should have investigated years ago: my legal rights as the property owner of Victoria's house. The answers were illuminating and empowering. As the deed holder, I had the legal right to inspect the property, approve major modifications, and most importantly, determine the terms of occupancy. The informal arrangement Victoria and Marcus had been treating as permanent was actually entirely at my discretion. If I chose to exercise my rights, I could require a formal lease agreement, set market rate rent, or even terminate their occupancy with proper notice. More interesting was what I discovered about the property's current value. The house I had purchased for $850,000 15 years ago was now worth $1.2 million, thanks to improvements in the neighborhood and the renovations that Victoria and Marcus had made. Renovations they had never asked my permission for, despite my legal ownership. The equity they spoke of so proudly as their investment was actually my asset appreciation. But what truly shocked me was reviewing my own financial situation with clear eyes for the first time in years. Between Robert's life insurance, my professor's pension, my parents' inheritance, and careful investments I had made during my working years, I was significantly more financially secure than I had been living. I had been operating from a scarcity mindset, constantly worried about being a burden, when in reality, I was probably wealthier than Victoria and Marcus combined. Around noon, my phone began buzzing with messages from Victoria. The first was breezy and casual. "Mom, thank you so much for last night. Everyone raved about the food. Judge Morrison specifically asked for your cassoulet recipe. You're amazing." The second, arriving 30 minutes later, was more specific. "Hey, when you have a chance, could you swing by to help with cleanup? There are so many dishes and I have a client showing this afternoon. Also, Mrs. Sterling mentioned wanting to book you for her daughter's engagement party next month. Apparently they're willing to pay $5,000. Isn't that incredible?" The third message revealed the true purpose. Also, Marcus left his notes for the partnership meeting in the kitchen. "Could you grab them when you come over? And maybe throw together something simple for dinner? The kids will be hungry when they get home from school, and we're both exhausted from last night." I stared at these messages, marveling at how perfectly they encapsulated our entire relationship dynamic. Praise for my work, followed by immediate requests for more labor, topped off with the assumption that my time was infinitely available for their convenience. The offer to book me for another event like I was a catering service was particularly galling. They wanted to profit from my skills while maintaining the fiction that I was just a helpful family member. For the first time in decades, I didn't immediately respond to Victoria's texts. Instead, I turned off my phone and spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in years. Nothing. I read a book, tended to my neglected plants, and took a long bath without worrying about anyone else's schedule or needs. The silence felt revolutionary. Every minute that passed without me rushing to solve Victoria's problems was a minute of reclaiming my own agency. I knew she would be confused by my lack of response. In our established pattern, I was always available, always eager to help, always ready to drop everything for her convenience. But that Eleanor, the invisible, accommodating, endlessly available Eleanor, was gone. In her place was the woman I used to be, and more importantly, the woman I was choosing to become, someone who understood her own worth, who recognized her own power, and who was no longer willing to accept crumbs from the table of her own generosity. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reshaping our family dynamic. But today, I was simply going to exist as Eleanor Hartwell, not Victoria's mother, not Marcus's convenient helper, not the twins' on-call grandmother, but a woman with her own needs, her own schedule, and her own life to live. The deed remained on my coffee table, a reminder that I had more power in this relationship than anyone realized. Soon, Victoria would learn that lesson too. By the second day of my silence, Victoria's texts had shifted from casual to concerned to increasingly desperate. The progression was almost textbook in its predictability. Exactly what I used to teach my students about negotiation tactics when one party suddenly withdrew from an established power dynamic. "Mom, are you okay? You haven't responded to any of my messages. I'm starting to worry." Then, "Called your landline but no answer. Did something happen? Marcus said maybe you caught something at the party. There were a lot of people there." Followed by, "Mom, this is really unlike you. The kids are asking where you are. Emma has a math test tomorrow and you always help her study. Can you at least let me know you're alive?" And finally, "Okay, I'm genuinely concerned now. I'm driving over to check on you if I don't hear back in the next hour." I was sitting in my garden with my morning coffee when I saw Victoria's BMW pull into my parking space. Through my window, I watched her hurry up the walkway, her face tight, with worry and frustration. When she knocked on my door, I waited a full 30 seconds before answering. another small act of reclaiming control over my own time and space. Mom. Victoria pushed past me into the living room, her relief quickly, morphing into irritation. Why haven't you been answering your phone? I was terrified something had happened to you. Do you have any idea how worried we've been? I noticed she said, "We've been worried," but hadn't brought the twins with her to check on their supposedly endangered grandmother. This was about Victoria's inconvenience, not genuine concern for my well-being. I've been fine, I said simply, settling back into my chair without offering Victoria a seat or refreshments, a complete departure from my usual hostess behavior. I just needed some quiet time to think. Victoria perched on the edge of my sofa, her real estate executive persona taking over. Think about what? Mom, if this is about the seating arrangement at the party, I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but you have to understand. It was a work event for Marcus. The conversation really was mostly legal shop talk that would have bored you to tears. The casual dismissal of my intelligence, wrapped in fake concern for my entertainment, was so perfectly Victoria that I almost smiled. It wasn't about being bored, Victoria. It was about being treated like hired help in a house that I own. For a moment, Victoria looked genuinely confused. What do you mean, a house that you own? It's our house. We've been paying the mortgage. For 15 years. You've been making payments to me, I corrected gently. I hold the deed. I am the legal owner of 847 Maple Ridge Drive. You and Marcus are essentially my tenants, though we've never formalized that arrangement. The color drained from Victoria's face as this information sank in. I could see her mentally reviewing our financial history, trying to reconstruct how she had forgotten or misunderstood such a fundamental fact about her living situation. But we've put so much money into renovations. We redid the kitchen, finished the basement, landscaped the entire backyard. That has to count for something. Improvements made to someone else's property without permission, I noted, my finance professor instincts kicking in. Legally, those become part of the property owner's assets unless there's a prior agreement specifying otherwise. Victoria's strategy shifted quickly from confusion to emotional manipulation. Mom, I can't believe you're talking about our family home like it's some kind of business transaction. This is where your grandchildren grew up. This is where we've celebrated every holiday for 15 years. How can you suddenly start talking about deeds and legal ownership? When that approach didn't immediately work, she tried a different angle. Is this about money? Because if you need financial help, we can discuss increasing our monthly payments. Marcus got a significant raise with the partnership, and we want to make sure you're comfortable. The irony was breathtaking. Victoria was offering to increase payments on a house she thought she owned to help me financially, when I was actually her landlord, and likely wealthier than she was. The depth of her misunderstanding about our financial relationship was both shocking and revealing. It's not about money, I said quietly. It's about respect. It's about being treated like a family member rather than an employee. It's about having my contributions acknowledged rather than being hidden in the kitchen while strangers praise my work. Victoria's face hardened. So, this is about the party. Mom, you're really going to upend our entire living situation because you were upset about where you sat for one dinner? When emotional manipulation failed, Victoria's tone became more calculated. Mom, I need you to think carefully about what you're saying. Emma and James are juniors in high school. They're applying to colleges, they have friends in the neighborhood. Their entire support system is built around this house. You can't seriously be considering disrupting their lives because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. The phrase midlife crisis was clearly borrowed from Marcus, a way to pathologize my sudden refusal to be invisible. But it was the threat to involve the twins that revealed Victoria's true nature. She was weaponizing my love for my grandchildren, using their stability as leverage to maintain her control over me. And frankly, Victoria continued, her voice taking on the crisp tone she used with difficult clients. "If you're really going to start making legal claims about the house, we should probably involve lawyers. I'm sure there are questions about adverse possession, tenant rights, and the investments we've made in the property over 15 years. It could get very complicated and very expensive for everyone involved." There it was, the direct threat. If I didn't return to my role as the invisible support system, Victoria would make my life legally and financially difficult. She was counting on my desire to avoid conflict, my concern for the twins, and my fear of expensive legal battles to force me back into submission. But what Victoria didn't understand was that her threats had just confirmed everything I had been realizing about our relationship. This wasn't a family discussion about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. This was a power struggle, and Victoria was making it clear that she would use any weapon available to maintain the status quo that benefited her. The woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed her career for her success, who had financed her lifestyle and provided endless unpaid labor, was now being threatened with legal action for daring to assert her own rights. In that moment, I realized that our relationship had been built on a foundation of exploitation so deep that Victoria couldn't even recognize it as such. And I was done pretending otherwise. After Victoria left my condo with barely concealed fury, I knew I needed professional help to navigate what was about to become a complex legal and emotional situation. The next morning, I called Patricia Chen, an estate planning attorney I had met years ago at one of Robert's professional functions. Patricia had been the only lawyer at that gathering who had asked about my work rather than simply nodding politely when introduced as Robert's wife. "Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise," Patricia said when her secretary put me through. "I was so sorry to hear about Robert's passing. How can I help you today?" I explained the situation as clearly as I could. The house deed, the informal payment arrangement, Victoria's threats, and my growing awareness that I had been legally and financially naive about protecting my own interests. Patricia listened, without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed both her expertise and her understanding of family dynamics. "Let me make sure I understand," Patricia said when I finished. "You own a property worth approximately $1.2 million. You've been receiving below-market payments with no formal lease agreement, and your daughter has been making unauthorized improvements while treating the property as her own asset?" When she put it that way, the scope of Victoria's presumption became even clearer. "Yes, and now she's threatening legal action if I assert my ownership rights." Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing notes. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly. What outcome do you actually want here? Are you looking to evict your daughter, formalize the rental arrangement, or simply establish clear boundaries about how you're treated?" The question forced me to confront what I really wanted beyond just being respected. I want Victoria to see me as her mother, not as her unpaid employee. I want acknowledgement of my contributions to her success. And I want the security of knowing that my own financial interests are protected. "Those are reasonable goals," Patricia said. "And fortunately, you have significant leverage to achieve them. Let's schedule a meeting for tomorrow to review your documents and discuss your options." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my former department chair at Northwestern to ask about guest lecturing opportunities. Dr. Richard Pemberton had been a friend and colleague during my active teaching years, and I was curious whether the academic world might still have a place for me. "Eleanor!" Richard's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "I can't tell you how many times I've thought about reaching out. Your expertise in behavioral finance would be incredibly valuable for our current curriculum. We've been struggling to find someone who can bridge the gap between financial theory and real-world decision-making." We talked for nearly an hour about developments in the field, new research on investor psychology, and the practical applications of behavioral economics in retirement planning. By the end of the conversation, Richard had offered me a guest lecture, series on financial decision-making in later life, a topic that felt almost satirically relevant to my current situation. The irony isn't lost on me, I told him, that I'll be teaching graduate students about financial empowerment while simultaneously learning to apply those principles to my own family relationships. Richard laughed. Sometimes the best teachers are those who are actively working through the challenges they're teaching about. Your real-world experience will make the material more compelling, not less. Hanging up from that call, I felt a spark of my former professional identity returning. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell still existed beneath the layers of accommodation and service I had wrapped around myself. More importantly, I still had valuable knowledge and skills that the world needed, skills that Victoria had somehow learned to take for granted and dismiss. The next evening, I called my sister Margaret, who lived in Portland. Margaret was 3 years younger than me and had taken a completely different path. Never married, built a successful architectural firm, traveled extensively, and maintained fierce independence throughout her life. We had grown somewhat distant over the years, partly because my absorption in Victoria's life had left little energy for maintaining other relationships. "Eleanor, it's so good to hear from you," Margaret said. "Though I have to admit, I'm surprised. Usually when we talk, it's because Victoria needs something and you're coordinating the family response." Her observation stung because it was accurate. Even my relationship with my own sister had become filtered through Victoria's needs and schedule. "Actually, I'm calling about something different. I think I need some perspective on my relationship with Victoria." I found myself telling Margaret everything: the dinner party humiliation, the house ownership situation, Victoria's threats, and my growing awareness of how completely I had disappeared into my role as family support system. Margaret listened, with the kind of focused attention I remembered from our childhood, when she would help me work through complex problems by asking the right questions. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" Margaret said when I finished. "When did you start believing that your worth was measured entirely by what you could do for other people?" The question hit like a physical blow. "I don't know. Somewhere along the way, I guess I just accepted that being needed was the same as being valued. But needed for what? Your labor? Your money? Your constant availability? That's not love, Eleanor. That's exploitation with a family discount." Margaret's next words gave me permission to feel something I had been suppressing for years: anger. "You know what makes me furious about this whole situation? Victoria has had the privilege of a mother who sacrificed her own career, who provided endless emotional and financial support, who literally owned the house that launched her social status. And instead of gratitude or respect, she's learned to see all of that as her entitlement. But she's my daughter," I protested weakly. "I chose to help her build her life. There's a difference between choosing to help and being taken advantage of," Margaret said firmly. "And there's an even bigger difference between being appreciated for your sacrifices and being dismissed as irrelevant once you've served your purpose." By the time we hung up, I felt validated in a way I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. Someone else could see the patterns I had been questioning. Someone else recognized that what I was experiencing wasn't normal family dynamics, but systematic diminishment of my worth and dignity. The next morning, I woke up with a clear sense of purpose. I had professional allies who valued my expertise, legal counsel who understood my rights, and family members who could see the situation clearly. Victoria might have expected me to retreat in the face of her threats, but instead, I was building the foundation for a completely different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. The time had come to use my leverage not as a weapon, but as a tool for creating the healthy boundaries that should have existed all along. 3 days after my meeting with Patricia Chen, a certified letter arrived at Victoria's house, and a copy came to my address. Patricia had crafted the document with surgical precision. A formal notice requiring Victoria and Marcus to enter into a proper lease agreement within 30 days, bringing their monthly payments up to fair market value and acknowledging my ownership rights, including approval for any future modifications to the property. The letter also included a detailed accounting of the property's appreciation over 15 years, the unauthorized improvements made without owner consent, and EI calculation of below-market rent they had been paying. The numbers were stark. Victoria and Marcus had been living in a $1 million home while paying roughly 60% of what they would pay for comparable rental housing. Most importantly, Patricia had included a clause requiring written acknowledgement of my ownership status in any future social or professional contexts where the property was discussed. No more allowing Victoria to present the house as theirs to impress colleagues and clients. I knew Victoria would receive the letter around noon, when she typically returned from her morning property showings. By 12:30, my phone was ringing, with an unfamiliar number. Marcus calling from his law office, his voice tight with professional control barely containing personal fury. "Eleanor, we need to discuss this letter from your attorney. There are several legal inaccuracies that need to be addressed before this situation gets out of hand." His attempt to use his legal credentials to intimidate me might have worked on the old Eleanor, but the woman who had spent the past week rebuilding her professional confidence wasn't impressed. "Marcus, I suggest you have your attorney contact Patricia directly. I'm no longer interested in informal family discussions about legal matters." 2 weeks later, I stood in the same lecture hall where I had taught graduate students 20 years ago, looking out at 30 bright faces eager to learn about behavioral finance and family wealth dynamics. Dr. Pemberton had introduced me not as Victoria's mother or Robert's widow, but as Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, former associate professor of finance and current consultant on intergenerational wealth planning. Today, we're going to examine a case study in financial decision-making that involves family relationships, property ownership, and the psychological factors that can blind us to our own economic interests. I began, clicking to my first slide. What I didn't tell the students was that the case study was my own life, carefully anonymized but entirely real. For 90 minutes, I walked them through the financial and emotional dynamics of a family where informal arrangements had created confusion about asset ownership, where emotional manipulation was used to maintain economically disadvantageous relationships, and where one party had systematically undervalued their own contributions. The students' questions were incisive and illuminating. "Why didn't the property owner formalize the arrangement earlier?" asked one student. "What psychological factors prevent people from advocating for their own financial interests?" asked another. Answering their questions felt like teaching my own story back to myself with the clarity of academic analysis. The personal pain was still there, but it was now contained within a broader understanding of family financial dynamics and power structures. After class, several students approached with follow-up questions, and 2 asked for references to graduate programs in family financial planning. Dr. Pemberton lingered as well, clearly pleased with how the session had gone. "Eleanor, that was exceptional. You've found a way to make complex financial concepts accessible through human stories. Have you considered developing this into a regular course offering?" What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly word would spread through Chicago's interconnected professional communities. Within days of the Northwestern lecture, I received a call from Janet Morrison, a senior partner at Chicago Financial Advisors, who specialized in estate planning for high-net-worth families. "Dr. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind the cold call. Dr. Pemberton shared some insights from your recent lecture, and frankly, we've been looking for someone with your expertise to help with some complex family financial situations. Would you be interested in consulting work?" Janet explained that her firm regularly encountered families where unclear ownership arrangements, informal financial agreements, and emotional manipulation created both legal vulnerabilities and relationship conflicts. My combination of academic expertise and lived experience was exactly what they needed to help clients navigate these sensitive situations. The irony was perfect. Victoria's attempts to diminish my relevance had pushed me back into professional life, where my skills were not only valued but in high demand. While she saw me as an aging woman with too much time on her hands, the broader professional community recognized me as an expert with rare insights into complex family dynamics. The consulting opportunity led to something even more unexpected. Janet's firm was hosting a workshop for professional women on financial independence in later life, and they asked me to be the keynote speaker. The event was scheduled for the Fairmont Chicago, the same hotel where Victoria often brought high-profile clients for closing dinners. The workshop drew 200 attendees, primarily women in their 50s and 60s who were navigating career transitions, divorces, or family financial conflicts. Many had stories remarkably similar to mine. Highly educated women who had stepped back from careers to support families, only to find themselves financially vulnerable and personally invisible later in life. My presentation, Reclaiming Your Financial Voice, combined academic research with practical strategies for women who had allowed others to control their financial narratives. I talked about the psychology of accommodation, the legal importance of formal agreements in family, financial arrangements, and the professional opportunities available to women with decades of accumulated expertise. The response was overwhelming. Women approached me afterward with stories of their own financial displacement, questions about asset protection, and requests for guidance on rebuilding professional identities. Several asked for my card, others wanted to connect me with friends facing similar situations. As the event concluded, Janet pulled me aside with an unexpected offer. "Eleanor, we'd like to retain you as a consultant on a permanent basis. Your expertise in family financial dynamics is exactly what our client base needs, and your ability to connect with women who've been financially marginalized is remarkable." Standing in that hotel ballroom, surrounded by professional women who valued my expertise and sought my guidance, I realized how completely my life had transformed in just a few weeks. The invisible woman who had been relegated to eating in the kitchen had become Dr. Eleanor Hartwell again, not just in name, but in substance and recognition. Victoria might not have received the memo about my transformation yet, but the rest of Chicago's professional community certainly had. And that public recognition was about to become a very powerful tool in reshaping our family dynamic. Victoria arrived at my condo on a Tuesday evening without warning, her face a mask of controlled fury that I recognized from her most difficult real estate negotiations. But this time, her anger was mixed with something I had never seen before: uncertainty. The woman who had always been confident in her ability to manage and manipulate family dynamics was clearly struggling to understand how the power balance had shifted so dramatically. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room with the same entitlement she had always displayed. But when she saw the Northwestern lecture materials spread across my coffee table, along with several business cards from Chicago financial advisors, she stopped short. "What is all this?" Victoria picked up one of my new business cards, Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, Family Financial Dynamics Consultant. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm working," I said simply, settling into my chair with the calm confidence I had been rebuilding over the past month. "Something I haven't done in 20 years, thanks to your assumption that my time was infinitely available for your convenience." Victoria's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "This is ridiculous. You're 67 years old. You don't need to be working. We've been taking care of you." The phrase, "taking care of you," was so perfectly wrong that I almost laughed. "Victoria, I own your house. I've provided hundreds of thousands of dollars in free labor and financial support. In what universe have you been taking care of me?" "That's not how any of this works." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You're my mother. You're supposed to help me build my life, support my career, be there for your grandchildren. That's what mothers do." "Is it?" I asked quietly. Because I was under the impression that adult children were supposed to build mutually respectful relationships with their parents, not treat them as unpaid employees. Victoria began pacing my small living room, her real estate executive persona taking over. Look, if this is about the lease agreement, we can negotiate. Marcus has reviewed the terms, and some of them are unreasonable. Market rate rent would be a significant financial burden, especially with the twins' college expenses coming up. Then perhaps you should consider downsizing to something more affordable, I suggested. There are lovely rental properties available. That might better fit your actual budget. The suggestion that she might have to leave her house hit Victoria like a physical blow. You can't be serious. That house is our home. It's where Emma and James grew up. It's central to my business, reputation. You can't just evict us. I'm not evicting you, Victoria. I'm asking you to acknowledge reality. You are living in my house, under terms that have been financially advantageous to you for 15 years. The time has come to formalize that arrangement or end it. Victoria's final card was predictable. Emotional manipulation through the grandchildren. What about Emma and James? They're applying to colleges. They need stability. You're going to destroy their futures because you're having some kind of identity crisis? For a moment, the old Eleanor flickered, the grandmother who would do anything to protect her grandchildren's well-being. But then I remembered the twins' casual expectation of my availability, their absorption of their mother's attitude toward my time and resources, and I realized that protecting them meant teaching them better values. Emma and James will be fine, I said firmly. They're resilient, intelligent young people who deserve to learn that relationships are built on mutual respect, not exploitation. What I'm modeling for them now is that people, even grandmothers, have the right to be treated with dignity. Victoria stared at me as if I were a stranger. I don't understand what's happened to you. You used to care about family more than anything else. I still do, I replied. That's exactly why I'm insisting on a healthier dynamic. The family we've been doesn't serve anyone well. Not you, not me, and certainly not the twins who are learning. That love means endless accommodation without boundaries. Victoria left without another word, but the slam of my door felt like an exclamation point on 15 years of misunderstanding. The confrontation had crystallized something important. We weren't just disagreeing about housing arrangements or family expectations. We were operating from completely different definitions of love, respect, and responsibility. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether she wanted a relationship based on mutual dignity or no relationship at all. 3 days after my confrontation with Victoria, Emma called me directly, something that rarely happened without her mother's orchestration. Her voice was tentative, uncertain, as if she were navigating unfamiliar territory. Grandma Eleanor, Mom said you're upset about something and might not want to see us anymore. That's not true, is it? The manipulation was so transparent it broke my heart. Victoria had told the twins that I was rejecting them rather than explaining, that I was simply establishing boundaries with their parents. But Emma's call also revealed something hopeful. She had chosen to verify the story rather than simply accepting it. Emma, I will always want to see you and James, I said gently. But I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's been happening in our family. I invited both twins over for dinner the following weekend, not to cook for them, but to order pizza and actually talk. For the first time in years, we sat around my small dining table as equals rather than grandmother providing service and grandchildren receiving care. I don't understand what's happening, James said, his teenage directness cutting through family diplomatic language. Mom says you're being unreasonable about money, but you've never cared about money before. You're right, I haven't cared about money, I replied. But I've started caring about respect. There's a difference between helping family and being taken advantage of, even by people you love. Emma, always the more perceptive twin, asked the question that surprised me. Is this about the dinner party? Because I thought it was weird that you had to eat in the kitchen after cooking everything. The following Monday, Marcus called from his office, his lawyer voice in full effect. But beneath the professional tone, I could hear genuine concern, not for my feelings, but for the potential social embarrassment of their housing situation becoming public knowledge. Eleanor, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot with this lease arrangement. Victoria mentioned you've been feeling underappreciated, and we want to address that. What if we increased our monthly payments by 20% and formalized a long-term lease agreement? His offer revealed how little he understood about what had really changed. This wasn't a negotiation about money. It was about fundamental respect and recognition. Marcus, the issue isn't the amount of your payments. The issue is that you and Victoria have been treating my house as your property while treating me as your employee. That's not fair, he protested. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful enough to include me in the social events I catered? Grateful enough to acknowledge my ownership when colleagues compliment your home? Grateful enough to ask rather than assume when you need my time? The silence that followed told me Marcus was beginning to understand that this wasn't a problem he could solve with legal maneuvering or financial adjustments. The most surprising development came from Victoria's real estate colleagues. At an industry networking event, I was approached by Sarah Chen, one of Victoria's former mentors at Pinnacle Real Estate Group. Dr. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind me introducing myself. I've been hearing fascinating things about your consulting work with family financial dynamics. Victoria mentioned you've been helping families navigate complex ownership arrangements. I realized Victoria had been trying to spin my professional activities as something she had encouraged, maintaining her image while trying to minimize the embarrassment of our family conflict becoming public knowledge. Actually, I said carefully, my consulting work grew out of some personal experiences with informal family financial arrangements that became problematic over time. Sarah's expression sharpened with professional interest. That's exactly what the industry needs. Too many of our clients get into complicated family property situations without proper documentation. Would you be interested in speaking to our agent continuing education program? By the end of that conversation, I had been invited to develop a workshop series for real estate professionals on family property ownership issues. The irony was perfect. Victoria's attempts to manage my image had actually opened new professional doors. Even more satisfying was receiving a call from Dr. Pemberton about a permanent teaching position. Eleanor, the response to your guest lectures has been exceptional. We'd like to offer you a part-time faculty appointment, developing our new certificate program in family financial planning. Victoria had spent weeks trying to convince me that my age and circumstances made me irrelevant to the professional world. Instead, I was discovering that my combination of academic credentials and real-world experience was exactly what multiple industries needed. The ripple effects of my transformation were extending far beyond our family conflict. I wasn't just reclaiming my relationship with Victoria. I was reclaiming my entire professional identity and discovering new possibilities I had never imagined. The formal lease agreement was signed on a crisp spring morning in Patricia Chen's office. Victoria and Marcus sat across from me at the polished conference table, their signatures acknowledging what had always been legally true. I owned the house at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, and they were my tenants paying fair market rent. But more important than the legal documents was the shift in how we spoke to each other. Victoria no longer assumed my availability for last-minute favors. Marcus addressed me as Eleanor, rather than dismissively as Mom, when he disagreed with my decisions. The twins had adjusted to scheduling visits rather than expecting me to be constantly available. I want you to know, Victoria said as we gathered our papers, this hasn't been easy for me. I guess I never realized how much I had come to depend on you for things I should have been handling myself. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement, the first Victoria had offered of the imbalance in our relationship. Learning to see each other as whole people rather than just family roles is hard work, I replied. But it's worth doing. The financial arrangement had forced practical changes that led to emotional ones. Paying market rent meant Victoria and Marcus had to budget more carefully, which meant fewer assumptions about my financial availability for emergencies. Having a formal lease meant they had to ask permission for major home modifications, which meant consulting me as the property owner rather than simply informing me of their decisions. My return to Northwestern had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. The Family Financial Planning Certificate program had a waiting list, and my consulting practice was booked months in advance. But the most rewarding aspect was mentoring women who were reclaiming their own financial voices after years of accommodation and invisibility. Dr. Pemberton had offered me a full-time position, but I had chosen to remain part-time, finally understanding the difference between choosing flexibility and having flexibility imposed upon me. My schedule was full but balanced, meaningful but sustainable. The research paper I was developing on financial decision-making and intergenerational family relationships had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Family Economic Issues. The case studies drew heavily on anonymized versions of situations I had encountered in consulting, including my own experience, transformed now from personal pain into professional expertise. The most significant change came during our first family dinner at the house since the lease signing. Instead of cooking for hours beforehand and serving from the kitchen, I arrived as a guest carrying a single side dish. Victoria had prepared the main course herself, not expertly but adequately, and we all sat around the dining room table as equals. Emma was excitedly describing her acceptance to Northwestern's business program, where she planned to study sustainable finance. "Grandma Eleanor, maybe I can take one of your classes when I'm a junior." James was equally animated about his marine biology research project. "I've been thinking about what you said about asking for what you deserve, rather than just accepting what people offer. I think I'm going to apply for that competitive summer research program after all." The twins had absorbed lessons about self-advocacy and mutual respect that would serve them far better than my previous modeling of endless accommodation. Victoria was learning to manage her own household and career demands rather than outsourcing them to me. Marcus had developed genuine appreciation for domestic labor now that he occasionally had to contribute to it himself. Most importantly, when the evening ended, I kissed my family goodbye and drove home to my own space, my own life, my own choices. I was no longer invisible, no longer taken for granted, no longer existing primarily to serve others' needs. The woman who had once stood in a kitchen eating alone while strangers praised her cooking was now Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, teacher, consultant, property owner, and grandmother, who was finally modeling what it looked like to value yourself enough to demand that others value you too. The deed to 847 Maple Ridge Drive still bore my name. But more importantly, I had reclaimed the deed to my own life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.